What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Putin wanted to open the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum with the usual image of control, confidence, foreign guests, and the familiar Kremlin performance where Russia is supposedly stable, protected, and still somehow open for business. But right before Putin's showcase event even got underway in his own home city, St. Petersburg, Ukrainian drones reached that city, hit an oil terminal, and according to Ukraine, also struck a military facility in Kronstadt, where Russia has Baltic Sea fleet infrastructure and major shipbuilding and repair facilities. Reuters reported that Ukraine released video of a drone striking the Russian corvette Boiky in dry dock, while Russian officials said that 59 Ukrainian drones were shot down overnight. Several facilities were damaged, and Pulkovo airport temporarily restricted flights, with more than 30 flights delayed or either cancelled. And here is the part that changes the whole meaning of this entire story. This was not just an oil terminal. This was not just another industrial site. No, this was a naval dock, a warship, and Russia's second most important city, hit just hours before Putin was expected to appear at his own economic forum. Now, to be clear, no article I have at my disposal confirms that this was an actual attempt on Putin's personally. These are just my assumptions, but politically and strategically, the question is completely unavoidable. Why hit Kronstadt? Why hit a warship in a dry dock? Why hit St. Petersburg on this exact day, exact hour? And why do it right before Putin was expected in the city, potentially even in that place? When you remember that Putin loves surprise appearances, especially around military sites and carefully staged public events, it is at least possible that Ukraine was sending a message not only to Russia's oil system, not only to Russia's navy, but also to Putin's personal security bubble. And the irony is almost too perfect. Putin likes to make people wait. He likes the theater of delay. He likes appearing when everyone is already standing there, cameras ready, officials frozen in place, pretending this is normal. And this time, maybe that very same habit of being always late protected him from something far more serious. Once again, we cannot prove there was a direct plan targeting Putin himself, but we can say this. If someone inside Russia leaked travel expectations, schedules, security rhythms, or likely even movement patterns, then this strike suddenly becomes much more than a drone attack. It becomes a direct psychological challenge to the Kremlin's inner circle. It becomes an open betrayal of Putin. In addition to this major event and the main topic of today's video, Russia had also just launched one of its largest recent air attacks against Ukraine, using more than 656 drones and 73 missiles, according to the Ukrainian Air Force, forcing Poland to scramble fighter jets, activate ground-based air defense systems and radar systems, and also coordinate with NATO Air Command, the French Air Force, and Dutch support to protect Polish airspace. So today's briefing is about just one big question. Is Putin still controlling escalation, or is escalation now starting to reach him, his cities, his navy, his economy, and even his carefully protected personal image? Let's try to answer all of this in today's video. Here is where it gets interesting, because the timing of the St. Petersburg strike matters almost as much as the targets themselves. This was once again St. Petersburg, Russia's second largest city, home to more than 5 million people, Putin's own political birthplace, and the location of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the event often described as Russia's version of Davos. This forum exists for one single reason, at least now: to convince everyone that Russia is not isolated, that foreign guests still come, and that Putin still has a functioning economic future to sell. But Ukraine hid that picture before it could even fully appear on the television screens. Reuters reported that Ukrainian drones struck an oil terminal in St. Petersburg and a warship in dry dock at a nearby naval base, while President Vladimir Zelensky said Ukrainian drones had also targeted a military facility in Kronstadt. Ukraine said the drone struck the Russian corvette Boiky in dry dock, and Reuters verified the location and vessel model, while saying it could not independently verify how serious the damage was. Now here is the key point. Even if the damage was limited, the message was loud and clear. Ukraine did not need to destroy half the city. Ukraine only needed to show that Putin's prestige city during Putin's prestige forum was not untouchable. Smoke was visible from St. Petersburg historic center. Loud explosions were heard by Reuters correspondents, and some of the forum guests would have heard them too for sure. That alone creates the image Moscow hates the most, not collapse, but vulnerability. And speaking about the guest list, Reuters reported that Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman was among the prominent guests expected, while Americans included, guess who? Steven Seagal, Candace Owens, and Rodney Mims Cook Jr. were also due to attend, with the Kremlin saying Cook would be the first ever serving US official to attend since 2018. And now just imagine the scene. Putin wants foreign guests, energy figures, and friendly media personalities to see a confident Russia. Instead, the opening story becomes drones, air defenses, delayed flights, a damaged oil terminal, and a warship in dry dock. And because Putin was expected there within hours, because the dock was military linked, and because Putin has a known habit of carefully staged, but sometimes surprising appearances, the speculation becomes impossible to ignore. Was this simply embarrassment? Or was Ukraine also probing Putin's personal security environment? That question leads us directly to the deeper issue, because if Putin's own city is no longer protected from the war, then Russia's economy is not protected either. And by the way, if you find this exact article on Ground News, it will present exactly the same event as either a military operation or a political humiliation. One headline says, drone attack. Ukraine hits at the heart of Russia only hours before the Economic Forum. That framing focuses on timing and strategy. The message is that Ukraine managed to strike one of Russia's most important cities just before a major international event. It sounds like a calculated move designed to grab attention at the exact moment the Kremlin wanted the world's attention focused completely elsewhere. But then as you scroll down a little bit, another outlet frames the very same event like this. Ukrainian attack on St. Petersburg embarrasses Putin. Well, as you can see, now the story is not really about the drones anymore. Now it is about Putin, about reputation, about political image. Instead of discussing the attack itself, the focus shifts to what it means for the Russian leader personally. Same event, same day, completely different takeaways and perceptions. This is exactly why I use Ground News. Instead of getting just one version of the story from the one outlet, you can compare headlines side by side and instantly see how different publications frame the very exact same event. Some emphasize military strategy and timing, others emphasize political consequences and leadership perception. Ground News also shows you how many sources are covering the story and where those outlets sit across the political spectrum, helping you understand not just what is happening, but how different media organizations want you to think about what is happening. You can even read summaries of left, center, and right-wing media and ultimately get AI bias comparison total summary. Because headlines do not just inform, they frame the story before you have even read the first sentence. And guys, if you want 40% off the Vantage plan, please scan this QR code you can see on the screen or go to ground.news/RussianDude and please subscribe. Don't just read the news, see how the news is being told. Thanks so much Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now back to the program. Here is what most people overlook. The St. Petersburg strike did not create Russia's economic anxiety, it just exposed it. The forum was already happening at the very uncomfortable moment for the Kremlin, because Reuters reported that Russia's $3 trillion commodity-dependent economy slowed to about 1% growth last year, down from 4.9% in 2024, and shrank by 0.2% in the first quarter of 2026, with growth now only forecast at 0.4% this year. That is obviously not the image Putin wants at a business, economic forum. The official language is investment, technology, AI, e-commerce, banking, and new partnerships outside in the West. But the underlying problem is simple. You can pump state money into military production and keep some factories busy, but you cannot build a normal consumer economy out of products that ordinary people do not use, do not buy, and do not benefit from. That is why the comment from Rinat Suleimanov, a State Duma member from the Communist Party, matters so much. He said the economy will not survive a lengthy continuation of what Russia officially calls the special military operation. And he made the very basic point that military output does not have consumer value because the population cannot consume it. Why would people benefit from tanks and drones? I don't know. And what? This is not a Ukrainian official saying that Russia has these problems. This is not a Western analyst trying to hurt Russian morale. No, this is a Russian political figure pointing at the structural weaknesses. If the economy becomes too focused on the war, it may look active on paper while becoming less healthy in real life. Reuters also reported that Ukrainian drone attacks deep inside Russia against refineries, fertilizer plants, and ports have affected a significant part of the economy, including 1/4 of refining capacity, creating the risk of fuel shortages during the driving season. That detail connects directly to St. Petersburg. Ukraine is not only chasing headlines, Ukraine is targeting the infrastructure that turns oil, ports, refineries, and logistics into state power. Russia spent years assuming that Ukrainian cities would remain under pressure, while Russian economic hubs stayed mostly insulated. That assumption is now breaking down. And here is the hidden contradiction on Putin's forum. The official message says Russia can grow through endurance, domestic substitution, and non-Western partners. But Reuters also reported that Russian stock market rallies after positive news from US-mediated peace talks show that the business really wanted, which is to end the war. In other words, the market is saying what officials cannot say out loud. Peace sounds profitable because the war is becoming too expensive. And that economic pressure is exactly why the Kremlin is trying to change the political language of the war. Now here's where things get tricky, because Moscow is trying to frame the current phase as if Russia is only responding to Ukraine. But the language from the Kremlin tells us something important. Reuters reported that Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the war had entered a different paradigm because of what Moscow described as Ukrainian actions against civilians, and he also said that Russia would keep striking Ukraine systematically while the peace process was on hold. That phrase, different paradigm, is not random. Governments use language like that when they really want to normalize a shift before the full political cost arrives. It simply means the rules are different now, our response will be broader now, and if you do not like what comes next, we will say you forced us into it. But Peskov also repeated that Russia remains open to peace negotiations while keeping the Kremlin's demand that Ukraine withdraw from 4 Ukrainian regions Russia claimed as its own in 2022. That is the contradiction here. Moscow wants the language of negotiation while keeping terms that Kyiv sees as complete capitulation. And this connects directly to the NBC story about Russia pressuring the United States and Ukraine's allies to leave Kyiv while threatening systematic strikes. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reportedly told the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio that Washington should evacuate its embassy because Moscow was planning systematic strikes, while Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha urged allies to not give in to Russian blackmail, and European Mission Chief Katarina Matkherova said that the European Union was not going anywhere. That line matters because Russia is not only trying to pressure Ukraine militarily, it is trying to create the image that Kyiv is becoming diplomatically unsafe, that foreign missions should leave, and that Ukraine's capital can be psychologically isolated. If diplomats leave, Moscow gets a propaganda victory. If they stay, Russia's pressure campaign looks weaker. So the Kremlin's new paradigm is not just about battlefield pressure. It is about political pressure, diplomatic pressure, and psychological pressure. But the problem for Moscow is that the same escalation meant to intimidate Ukraine is also pulling NATO countries into constant alert mode, with one of the most recent responses coming from Poland. At this point, you might be wondering why Poland's reaction matters if Polish airspace was not violated. Well, the answer is pretty simple. Escalation is not only measured by whether a border is crossed. It is measured by how many countries have to activate aircrafts, air defense systems, and allied coordination because of what Russia is doing near NATO's eastern border. Polish radio reported that Poland scrambled fighter jets and placed air defense systems on alert as Russia launched a massive overnight air attack on Ukraine. The operational command of Poland's armed forces said it deployed all necessary forces and resources, end of quote, to ensure Polish airspace safety and monitor the situation continuously. The Polish military then said ground-based air defense systems and radar reconnaissance were placed on alert. Military aircrafts were activated during the night, and around 4 a.m. local time, the threat to regions bordering Poland had decreased, allowing aircraft to return to base. Polish officials said there were no violations of Polish airspace, while thanking NATO Air Command, the French Air Force, and the Dutch Armed Forces for support. Now, this is obviously not an Article 5 moment, and we should not exaggerate it, but it is a sign of how normal this new military readiness has become. Russia launches a huge attack on Ukraine, and Poland has to bring aircrafts, activate radars, coordinate with NATO, and watch the border through the night, continuously. And the scale also explains why all this is happening. According to the Ukrainian Air Forces, Russia used more than 656 drones and 73 missiles in that overnight wave alone. Those numbers matter because Russia is trying to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses through volume, timing, and repeated pressure. Even if Ukraine intercepts many incoming systems, every large wave forces Kyiv to spend those interceptors, strain radar networks, and ask Western partners for more air defense support. That is why the Patriot question is once again now central. Poland can scramble jets, NATO can monitor the skies, even European governments can issue statements, but Ukraine still needs enough real systems, enough trained crews and enough predictable resupply to defend its cities through repeated waves. And that is where the next problem becomes unavoidable. Now here is the game changer. Russia's air campaign is not only about immediate pressure, it is also about testing Western production capacity. Every major Russian strike asks the very same question. Can the West deliver air defense faster than Russia can generate new attack waves? That is why Vladimir Zelensky keeps pushing for more Patriot systems. When one wave includes more than 656 drones and 73 missiles, the question is not simply whether Ukraine has good technology. The question is whether Ukraine has enough launchers, enough crews, and enough supply depth to avoid being forced into these impossible choices. This is what so many people unfortunately misunderstand about Patriot systems. They just imagine a single magic shield. But air defense is a layered system. Some threats can be handled just by cheaper systems, others require more advanced interceptors. I mean, why would you try to intercept a hypersonic ballistic missile with, drones or helicopters? So if Russia combines drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, decoys, and complicated timing, Ukraine has to make fast decisions under pressure. And this is exactly where Moscow wants to create stress. Russia wants Ukraine to spend scarce interceptors. Russia wants Western governments to choose between their own stockpiles and Ukraine's needs. Russia wants every major attack to become a debate in Washington, Brussels, Warsaw, Berlin, and other capitals. This also explains the pressure on foreign embassies in Kyiv. If Russia can make Kyiv seem unsafe, force Ukraine to spend air defense resources, and make Western officials worry about escalation, then Moscow believes it can create political fatigue without needing a dramatic ground breakthrough. But that is the paradox of today's briefing. Russia is increasing pressure from the air, but on the ground, the story is much less impressive, at least for Moscow. And if the ground offensive is not producing the breakthrough Putin needs, as it's not, then the air campaign starts to look less like confidence and more just like a compensation for these failures. Let's now take a step further because the battlefield picture changes the meaning of every other story today. According to the Institute for the Study of War's most recent assessment, Ukrainian forces have largely halted the Russian spring-summer 2026 offensive so far. That does not mean that Ukraine has completely no problems. It does not mean the front line became suddenly easy. No, Russia unfortunately still has the manpower advantages in some, if not most sectors, still pressures Ukrainian positions, and still uses drones, artillery, and infantry attacks to stretch the defenses. But the strategic point is that Moscow expected 2026 to create momentum, and so far, well, the momentum has been fully contained. Open source discussions around the same assessment highlighted a striking comparison. Russian forces advanced or infiltrated only into 40.64 square kilometers between December 25 and May 26, compared with 515.84 square kilometers from December 24 to May 25. That means the later period was only 7.87% of the earlier one. So while it is pretty obvious that Russia's pace appears dramatically weaker than the previous year, and this matters because Putin's war narrative depends on inevitability. Moscow wants Ukrainians to believe Russia can keep pushing forever. Moscow wants Americans and Europeans to believe that Ukraine is just one endless expense. And Moscow wants Russians, first of all, to believe that sacrifice is producing results and it's worth it. But if the ground offensive is slowing, then the narrative becomes harder to sustain. That is why the analysis about Putin needing a way out matters. His problem is not only military, it is also political. He cannot easily admit that the war is too expensive, too slow or too uncertain, because his entire leadership image is built around control, endurance and the idea that the time is on Russia's side. So what does he do instead then? Well, he escalates when he still can. He increases air pressure, he uses diplomatic warnings, he tries to turn every Ukrainian strike inside Russia into justification for a harsher campaign. But if the ground front is not delivering, the economy is slowing, and Ukraine can reach St. Petersburg right before Putin's forum. Well, then Putin's problem is not that he lacks tools. His problem is that none of the tools are producing the clean victory narrative he needs. And that brings us to the final chapter of today's video. The Russian public conversation and the economic warnings that are becoming way too harder to bury. Here is the perspective most people unfortunately do not think about. Authoritarian systems do not need everyone to protest before they become nervous. They become nervous when loyal people start asking practical questions, when business elites talk about costs, when regional budgets feel pressure, and when ordinary people, first and foremost, can no longer separate the war from daily life. The BBC article raised this question exactly and directly. Putin remains uncompromising on Ukraine, but is public discussion on the war changing in Russia? That matters because Russia has now lived with more than 4 years of full-scale war, and even among people who still support the Kremlin, concern can appear indirectly. Economic frustration, quiet anxiety, questions about security, and doubts about where the country is going. This connects us back to the St. Petersburg Forum. If business circles understand that the war is damaging growth, if the economy is forecast to grow only 0.4%, and if Ukrainian drone strikes are affecting refineries, ports, and possibly 1/4 of refining capacity, then the official narrative of endless resilience becomes way harder to sell. It also connects to the Japan Times article and Bloomberg reporting that senior Russian officials warned Putin that war spending is on an unsustainable path. For example, Finance Ministry and Central Bank officials reportedly proposed defense spending cuts, while the Defense Ministry resisted and just simply wanted more money. The same reporting said Russia's budget deficit reached 5.9 trillion rubles in the first 4 months of the year, or 2.5% of GDP, around 50% higher than the annual target. Now let's be extra careful moving forward, because this does not mean that Russia runs out of money tomorrow or soon. Russia still has, energy exports, reserves, and the ability to force pain onto its own population, but it does mean that the trade-offs are becoming way sharper. The Kremlin cannot endlessly fund the war, regional payments, social stability, and elite expectations without something breaking down somewhere. Finance Minister Anton Siluanov reportedly stressed the need for a certain restraint, quote-unquote, in the public expenditure, while Russia's National Wealth Fund reserves were described as only roughly 60% lower than before the full-scale invasion, already 60% lower. And that the Economy Ministry downgraded its 2026 growth forecast to only 0.4%. That is where the war starts moving from television into real daily life. It becomes way harder to sell sacrifice as patriotic destiny when growth slows, spending tightens, interest rates remain high, and even Putin's home city gets hit during the country's showcase economic forum. And the result of all this is that the war is reaching deeper into Putin's image of control. If Ukraine cannot stop him on the battlefield, they can at least try to stop him being seen undefeatable in heads of regular people. Guys, if you want more daily briefings like this with the battlefield, politics, economy and strategy connected all in one clear picture, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Thanks so much Ground News for sponsoring this video. All the useful links are down below, and see you on Monday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell.